three people that will comment on these from their own perspectives, and it's a great privilege to us to have Anmol Vellani here from India, who can now offer a non-European perspective. Anmol is an independent theatre director, writer, and teacher, so he comes also from the creative sector, and he's also the regional editor of World CP Asia. So this whole conversation has been also interesting for him in that role as well. So the comments will be around 5 to 7 minutes, and then we open the floor. We will have time to some questions and answers.
Thanks, Anna Marie. When Oliver first wrote to me, he said, why don't you speak for 5 minutes on cultural diversity and cultural rights in Asia? So I said, no, I can't do that. It's not possible. So I said, okay, I'll take on a less ambitious task and speak about the challenges and paradoxes of protecting and promoting cultural diversity in India. And I'll use the UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity 2005 as a reference point. The particular statement in the convention I want to start with is the one that says that linguistic diversity is a fundamental element of cultural diversity, and affirms the fundamental role that education plays in the protection and promotion of cultural expression. I will address the question of linguistic diversity first, and then turn to the role of education in India and what it's done for cultural diversity. The Indian Constitution has given special emphasis to promoting the teaching of the mother tongue, because as you know, India has multiple languages. At the primary level of education, protecting linguistic minorities is another emphasis, and it authorizes the states of India, the majority of which have been formed on linguistic lines, to adopt the official language of the state. The Official Languages Act 1963 says further that the states are authorized to use their respective official languages in the state parliament, central and state acts, and the High Court, which functions at the state level. Now, these instruments and provisions are at one level very welcome. The states have promoted the cultural expression of native speakers of the official language in a variety of ways, through awards, scholarships, grants, publication programs, state institutions that function to preserve, provide instruction in, and showcase local cultural expression. At another level, but this exclusive focus on cultural expression identified with the official language has had some paradoxical consequences and run counter to the goal of promoting cultural diversity. One consequence is that it has encouraged linguistic parochialism and an inward-looking view on the official language. The states are committed to the idea of cultural integrity within their boundaries. Their cultural policies stress the distinctiveness of the official language because it is the anchor of a distinctive identity. The states have thus been inclined to equate the protection of the official language with keeping the language fortified against contaminating outside influences. It is telling that not one state in India promotes exchange and dialogue with cultures and cultural expressions outside its boundaries, which runs contrary to the UNESCO Convention's insistence that the vitality and growth of a culture, and I quote, is nurtured by constant exchange and interaction between cultures, which is a sign of the particular kind of linguistic and cultural parochialism that has been bred by this insistence on everything happening in the local official language. Secondly, the division of Indian states on the basis of language has been inexact, because every linguistic state has other linguistic minorities. But because you have been encouraged to promote culture in the official language of the state, the other minority cultures, linguistic cultures that the states enfold are not given as much attention by the state, are ignored and marginalized. In other words, the states do not take seriously enough the UNESCO Convention's observation that cultural diversity presupposes equal respect for all cultures, including the cultures of persons belonging to minorities and indigenous peoples. I'll turn now to education. Does education in India play a fundamental role in protecting and promoting cultural diversity? Unfortunately not. In the Indian school system, curriculums are created from the top down, right, and make little, if any, reference to the worlds pupils inhabit. In the classroom, children live in a kind of bubble with their eyes shut to whatever might be part of their immediate experience. The subliminal message that pupils get is that nothing of value can be derived from the world in which they have grown up, their own cultural milieu and forms of life. The message is that this world, which has hitherto been their source of identity, must be discarded if they are to make the most of the fruits of education. The education system, in other words, does not connect learning to life, does not localize education. On the contrary, it does epistemic violence to native forms of knowledge and valuation. Far from promoting cultural diversity, Indian education is essentially assimilating in its tendencies. If we value cultural diversity, people must have access to their own and distinct culture, as the UNESCO Convention says, but it is not respected by the Indian school system.
Thank you, Anmol, for giving us this picture of the Indian reality. It seems to be that I have the feeling that every conference and every meeting that you go, one of the main issues that always comes up is education and the importance of education and how education should reflect the reality of the people, right? And the enormous importance that education has in building citizenship, be that cultural or national or any kind of citizenship, but building human citizenship in a way. And then we have a privilege to have Aleksandra Oszmiańska-Pagett from the College of Modern Languages, and also part of the committee of the Framework Convention on Minority Languages. So that kind of nicely offers a follow-up to what Anmol was saying about the linguistic diversity.
Well, hello, and thank you for inviting me. First of all, I would like to clarify the name of the convention, because we are very often, I'm here on behalf of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, which is a separate instrument to the Framework Convention on Minorities, but obviously covers the language of minorities, and that's the main focus of the convention that I here, well, not the convention, but the committee of experts that I represent here. And I would like to give you only a very brief explanation of how this convention is supposed to work. And first, I'm going to disappoint you, but then I hope I'm going to provide some positive information too. So the positive thing is definitely the fact that the convention focuses on the language, and that it does not focus only on mere permission of the use of the language, but encourages or even forces states to act, to have proactive approach to the promotion of the languages. The good bit for the state is the fact that the convention works as a menu from which the state party can choose. And I can already tell you that culture is a very important field because it's one of the fields which the state party has to choose from. So the convention is divided into fields that cover the public use of languages, and each state has to choose a particular number of undertakings from each field, and culture is the obligatory field. The thing that is also interesting, I think, when it comes to this convention is the fact that we don't only, because we monitor, obviously, how the states perform, but we don't only concentrate on the policy itself. We actually check the situation on the ground. And this is what was mentioned yesterday, that the compendium focuses on the policy. Well, we focus on the policy, but also check what's happening in a particular state, because we pay visits to the state. And the main source of information for our evaluation reports on the performance of the state is based on both the communication with the authorities, the central, but also the local, and there are two different perspectives here, and also the civil society. So we also consult the NGOs and the representatives of the speakers. So in this sense, we actually move from a purely cultural convention to something like human rights convention, because we take into account the needs and the wishes expressed by the speakers. But the disappointment obviously comes from the fact that the Charter, unfortunately, does not guarantee any individual rights or collective rights. So you cannot take somebody to court if your rights to particular provisions on the language are, well, violated or not provided for. But the last thing I wanted to say about how the Charter deals with culture is the fact that, to my mind, although the fields are divided, culture, as you have mentioned so many times today and yesterday, culture actually goes and is included in a lot of other fields. So, for instance, definitely in education, where we have the teaching of history and culture as one of the undertakings. In transfrontier exchanges, where the exchange is supposed to promote education and culture of minorities, and the media. So that's all that I wanted to say when it comes to the Charter. And as I'm also getting older, I'm also a bit more positive, because, as I've said, we do take into account the needs and wishes of the speakers, despite the fact that we don't guarantee any legal rights. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I want to thank all the speakers for respecting the time, the given time. So thank you very much for that. That was very interesting as well to hear from you. And our last commenter is Siobhan Montgomery. She's a senior project advisor at the Culture and Democracy Division at Council of Europe.
Hello. I was very impressed with Eva's speech. It's definitely an approach that I would agree with for the most part. I'm probably a lot less cynical about the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. That might be also because I'm a Council of Europe employee. However, I would definitely agree with the fact that culture has been seen as the poor cousin of civil and political human rights. When human rights were first being drawn up, some people would say there's a gender dimension to this difference. When human rights were being drawn up, feminist lawyers would say that the rights that were concentrated on were rights that mainly protected men in their domain of work and in their life interests. For instance, the right to life, which was against the executive power. So it covered cases such as the right to life in prison or the right to life in wartime. It didn't extend to cover the right to life of women suffering from domestic abuse or in other circumstances that would have affected women. It's also thought that social and economic and cultural rights are more a woman's issue, possibly have a larger importance for women's lives than particularly at that time, because of course society has evolved and our roles are changing all the time. But at that time, back in the 40s and the 50s, where women and men had had very distinct roles to play within society, it was felt that these rights were more female rights than men rights. I also think that some of the case law has in fact been quite positive. I would like to cite some of the cases. For instance, Roma law has been recognized in one of the cases, which was Munoz Diaz versus Spain. which concerned the refusal to pay Roma survivors' pension to a woman who had been married according to Roma ritual. And the court decided that since the government had never challenged this type of marriage, and that the Roma community within Spain was a well-established community, that her entitlement to survivor's pension could not be challenged on this basis. The court has also recognised access to internet for prisoners, and linguistic rights have also been acknowledged. So, for instance, in Turkey, the right to have your name spelt in Kurdish using Kurdish letters has also been recognised, where this was argued against by the state. However, if we look at the International Civil Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, we see that it's optional protocol. The optional protocol is the treaty that gives right to the individual complaints mechanism. This was adopted by states in 1966 and came into force in 1976. When we look at the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, however, its optional protocol didn't come into play until 2013. So again, we see that a very different importance is given to the different civil and political rights and economic, social and cultural rights. I would just like to finish by saying that Nina mentioned digitization and the impact of digitization on culture. We already have a platform dealing with this. It had its first meeting last year in Baku, in Azerbaijan. Out of this first platform came the draft recommendation on the Internet of Citizens, which looks at access to culture, how we can increase access to culture through digitization. It also looks at media literacy and how we can use cultural institutions as educational institutions in this field. I think that's all I wanted to say. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all the speakers. We might have a case here of positives against cynics. No, but it's a very good example of how there are different interpretations of similar kind of situations, not only at legal and policy level, but also that there are differences of opinion, but there seems to be a common will of working towards the same goal, which is enforcing cultural rights, or right to culture, or rights and culture, access to culture, all that phenomena of enabling, creating an enabling environment for everyone to be able to enjoy access to and participation in and recognition of creation, a cultural identity, enjoyment of culture, etc. We seem to have different opinions on what state we are in the, not what state we are, but how much has been achieved and how much seems to be left to achieve, and also differences in opinion of what has been the reason of behind some of the developments. But I mean that is very good. I can guarantee that in the beginning of 2002, it was only a bunch of people that were actually working in this field, and not many academics. And Yvonne Dundes, that was mentioned earlier, she was one of the few in Europe, and Patrice Meyer-Beach, one of the few people at an academic level really working in this field. And now, fast forward 10 years, and there's many more academic processes, legal experts working in the field, which brings the variety of opinions and voices, but also brings progress and maybe a slow movement of achievement as well. But at least what it achieves is this kind of debate. So we have around 15 minutes, and whether you're positive or cynic, please, have comment or question. We have 5 amazing people here with a lot of expertise. It's a great opportunity to ask your questions or comment, or if you have anything, you do not agree with, or you. Unfortunately, some of the legal experts had to leave the room because but I know that they were quite eager to comment on these issues. Andrew, please.
Thank you. I'm no legal expert, so this isn't a very legal question. It was just Nina's point, really, at the end, right at the end of your presentation, you talked about TTIP and single digital strategy, and you issued something of a call to arms, really, around evoking the convention. And this chimes. I kind of understand where you're coming from that, and it does sound like it's very important, but it would be good to hear a little bit more about that, actually, because I think many of us would be willing to be called to arms, but we would need to know which direction to be pointed in.
Well, I remember back in when there was this meeting in Cancun, the WTO, so some people from the culture sector said, let's go there and just chain ourselves, like probably we'll notice, someone will notice. So I don't know how my reference to what is happening sounded, but in some ways, and now I'll try to step back a little bit to this really peculiar situation, like the 2005 convention is the first legal instrument in the field of culture where the European Union had to become a party to the convention because in several aspects of what is covered in the convention, the European Union has exclusive responsibility or shared responsibility with its member states. It is the international development, it is because there is a reference to copyright, and it is, of course, the trade policies. So we thought that we were smart, and that once the EU subscribes to or adopts, signs this convention, that this will also partly limit the ability of the European Union within itself to make decision when it comes to international trade agreements that would counter the idea and the provisions of the convention. The lawyers from the European Commission who were working with us on negotiating the document knew it better, or they had better instructions. So they keep saying that there is a limitation to what the implementation of the convention can do in terms of interpreting the responsibility of the European Union abroad. However, what is even more striking is that a development such as the digital single market can become such a powerful and such at unprecedented speed, like the European Union, which can't agree on anything anymore. Somehow everybody is running into this digital single market. There is a mantra that this is saving the European economy. No one can actually give figures or explanation, or it's just somewhere there that this is what is going to save our economies. And whoever is a troublemaker, just don't be loud. Because this is going to save us. And we are found in a situation that at a territory where we thought that we invented the whole idea of specificity of culture and everything, we are being so silent at the developments that can completely change our cultural markets, which are already changing, but we are not ready to find regulatory measures that are going to counterbalance the developments which are really worrisome in terms of ensuring diversity, ensuring the right to produce and to create and to produce, and also what is even more important, to participate in diverse cultural activities. So in that context, I think that a noise should be made. There is noise. The film, as usual, the people around the film industry are well organized. The music sector is well organized. But I think that this is happening far too quickly, and that our response is really far too insignificant compared to the pace of these developments.
Any other comments?
Hello, sorry from this corner. My name is Hanna Schreiber. I'm from the University of Warsaw, and I was also impressed with all of the speeches. But of course, as a legal expert, also I was very impressed with Professor Belser's view on the right to culture. And my question, as I am quite new to this milieu, is whether the two other possibilities, apart from adopting a new additional protocol to European Convention, were discussed at all. These two other possibilities is the additional protocol to European Social Charter, of course with the new complaint procedure. I can believe that European Court of Human Rights has a strong soft power, and the idea that we can complain and raise individual complaint is very also important for the organizers. But what about the European Social Charter? And the last possibility was, what would you say, maybe it could be an idea to create a new instrument, taking into account the whole problematic related to the right to culture and different ideas embedded in the right to culture projects. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this interesting question. I have not been labeled or considered myself to be cynic until now, but I must add that I don't think it's politically feasible to have an additional protocol in the years to come. So my answer is more theoretic. If I could choose, I wouldn't make an additional protocol, but add the right to culture into the convention that we have. That's where it belongs. That would also give us a chance to brush up the convention, because it has gotten old a bit. I mean, restriction of free speech based on morals, I don't know. I think we should get rid of that. Put hate speech instead. So if I could choose, that's what I would do. Add the right to culture right into the convention as it is. The charter, yes, why not? But that brings us into the monitoring framework, which is developing very rapidly, and it is important. But I think the right to culture needs to be a justiciable right. I really think we need a court to enforce it, because the court also has the power to define it, to clarify the scope, and to clarify legitimate aims to limit it. And the monitoring body cannot do this in the same way. A new instrument, I don't think we need a new instrument. I mean, the argument in favor would be to do justice to the broadness of culture. But then I don't think we need that, because, as has been mentioned, so many things are happening around that are developing at fast speed. So the European country doesn't have to cover it all or to add another layer on what we have. I think it should just fill the gap on the individual human rights level.
So, so maybe we could ask all the speakers today that whether you think a new instrument is needed, or whether the existing instrument should be applied better or complemented, because we know that there are around 600 international instruments that have that touch upon at some point culture, and some of them overlap, some of them contradict. So, what would be your opinion? Do we need a new instrument? Do we need to apply better instruments? Is it needed? Do the changes happen at local level? That we've seen that national governments and even local governments are quite reactive in the field and may move faster than actually the big picture, the macro legal development. So, what would you be?
Well, sorry. So there is one comment that I would like to make here, and that will be a cynical comment this time. As Professor Bessler has mentioned, and I've been also impressed by your speech, is the fact that I don't believe that it will be possible. And I understand that culture is treated, for instance, in the charter, the language charter, let's use the shorter term, in exactly the way to avoid having to deal with the issue of culture and language, to a certain extent, in the courtroom. And but the positive, and that's what I was trying to say, that for me the positive thing is that despite this gap that you have mentioned, which is definitely there, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a legal expert. I'm a linguist, a sociolinguist, but I can see this gap. I'm aware of it. But on the other hand, because we do visit the States, we do talk to people, we also have a bit of a different vision of what's happening on the ground, at the grassroots level. And I must say that a lot more is done and can be done on the local level than it is on the central level. To the point that France, for instance, I don't know if you realize, but France is not a state party to the convention, the language charter, for obvious reasons, which you're probably aware of. But the region of Alsace is very active in promoting their local language, and there is an idea of something like local charters, so a version of the charter that would be maybe not ratified because they don't have the authority, but locally implemented. First adopted and then locally implemented. So in this sense, I think it's positive in the sense that there's more happening on the ground, right? Despite the fact that we have an obvious legal gap because culture, the right to culture, is not an individual right that you can fight for in the courtroom.
I also think it's highly unlikely that there would be an additional protocol to the Convention on the Right to Culture, but I do believe that it would strengthen the right to culture. At the moment, if you have an issue in this area, you have to play with the existing convention rights to be able to raise an application. Obviously, if you had a right to culture with a definition, then that would make it easier for you to lodge an application at the court once you had exhausted all the domestic remedies. Thank you. So yes, obviously it would strengthen the right to culture, I think.
I actually think that the question of whether we should have more or less charters or fill gaps is not a very useful question. I think the question is what happens after these things are made, after these conventions are made. How do states act on them? Do they act on them? Are they confused about what it means? How do they bring it into law? For example, India is a signatory to the convention we're discussing, the UNESCO convention. And I can also report that it has an interministerial mechanism in place, a committee in place, to actually respond to that convention and take action. I can also report that the committee has never met in the last 7 years. So, the question is, how effective are these? And look at a worldwide perspective. How effective are these conventions? What can we do to, I don't know, enforce the effectivity? I don't want to use the word enforce, but what action can we take to make sure that these conventions are taken even partially seriously by so many states around the world?
Well, if I can just follow up on what Mr. Vellani has said. Well, we do that by being pests, right? We're constantly pesting the state parties in our monitoring mechanism by asking questions, the questions that they may not be really happy about, and by analyzing the reports. They are, as party to the convention, to the charter, language charter, they have to produce reports every 3 years. But on top of that, we come and visit them. And we also try to get the balanced view by talking to the local authorities and to the NGOs. So in this way, there can be the monitoring that in some way it also serves as a guideline. There are also visits, extra visits and meetings with the authorities where we try and explain what is expected from this convention. So that's what we have.
So
Yes, but the problem is it's often not effective. And part of the reason it's effective is not because of the work you are doing, but because of the fact that governments themselves do not have the specialization and skills within the bureaucracy to take these conventions forward. And they are not willing to take on people from outside to actually help them with it.
Well, the question was that do we need a new instrument, or do we need to implement better the existing one and build monitoring structures? How can we see what the actual outcome on, so that we can see how an international instrument is transferred or translated into policies, and what kind of outcome the policies have, and what methods we can use to actually measure that impact, and whether that's measurable anyway. So the last speaker today will be Nina, because we have to wrap up, because we have another panel, really interesting panel after this. So Nina, can we be really short?
Yeah, it will be just a minute, because I wouldn't like us to leave the room with the bit of confusion that happened now. I think there is a huge difference. There are the conventions can be called this and that, but the enforcement of different legal instruments is different. So when we talk about human rights, and especially at the European level, and European Court of Human Rights with explicit tasks to develop jurisprudence, and this is completely different when you talk about UNESCO conventions, which do not have that kind of I would say not even intent to have that kind of implementation. So while they are conventions, whether very often they are more regarded as declarations, because there is so very few binding provisions in this instrument. So I think it should be really, really very well distinct. So in that context, if enforcement of human rights, cultural rights, or right to culture, I would also think that adding it in the existing system would be the only meaningful thing, because building the whole new legal structure, be it within an organization or a standalone, it's costly, it's complicated, it takes time to develop. So, and I don't think that there is political will at the moment to launch such a huge effort thing at the global level or European, whatever.
Well, I would like to thank all our 5 speakers. We give a big applause to them. Thank you so much for sharing expertise with us and answering questions. Thank you.